and welcome to Crash Course American Lit. Today we will be discussing the novel The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, and our main theme of learned racism in the 21st century. Huck Finn is set in the South at a time that is very contextually different than it is today. During the early 19th century, which is around the time period of the novel, slavery was very prominent and considered the norm. Conformity in that location led to slavery being seen as morally correct. Society had no ethical problem with the practice. However, as we have learned, Twain uses satire to point out the problems and the immorality that was present at the time. Even though we have progressed a great deal since the time of Huck Finn, the extent to which racism is still present and learned in today's society is truly astonishing. Our goal was to investigate the degree to which racism is still present in our society and how we are still exposed to it on a subconscious level. For our project, we used both black and white students and teachers and gave them an IAT race test. This test was proctored and administered by Harvard University. This showed us how strongly an individual preferred one race or the other. The chart is shown in the next slide. Afterwards, we interviewed each participant to hear what they had to say. Here are some of their responses.
Sure. Yeah, I believe so.
I don't think it's racism. I think it's more inexperience and not being aware. Yes.
Yes.
Sure.
I think while it's not overt racism, I think that there are still racial undertones that happen regardless of where you are in society.
I don't think extreme racism exists in our high school,
But
but I think there are general stereotypes.
So I have to press. Can I press good or no? Wait, even if I press what I want to press, it's going to say it's wrong.
I kind of felt like at one point, I know when I asked you about whether or not how it had like African American associated with bad, I'm like, well, it's making me put that these things go under African American, but I wouldn't have put them there.
Every time I look at a face that looks like me and I have to select bad, it makes me unhappy.
Yeah. So we went through, I think it was Gucci, but we weren't buying anything. We just wanted to go inside, and so we got followed. And they didn't believe that we could afford anything, and they asked us if we had enough money.
When I was at Walgreens, not too long ago, about a week ago, a woman, her purse was on the cash, like on the table. She was checking out, and she grabbed her purse a little bit. Yeah, I've experienced racism.
Yes. Not like when I was younger, not to the same extent. I think that comes with age and standing.
No.
I think I'm pretty lucky. I can't say that I've experienced direct racism.
Nobody's born racist. I think it has to be taught, even in preschool. I remember a time where, I just thought that, black people were just, bad, And then it's just because, those TV shows and, all those movies I saw, all the gangsters that would shoot people were always black. And, so it is taught you're not born being racist.
I think it's the way people are raised, because kids aren't taught to hate each other by race or gender or sexuality. It's kind of ingrained in our society.
I think you see it whether it's on TV, in the movies and media. You look at a television network show in the evenings, and there's not that many anchors of color. You know, you'd see the movies or the music stars. We have like people like Halle Berry, Beyonce. They're glorified, but they're light-skinned women. Whereas you don't see necessarily Lupita Nyong'o on the screens of TV all the time. You don't always see it. You see her in some movies, but not all the movies. You don't see her in all the beauty campaigns. So I think that we're so taught that, sure, people of color are great, but only people who look sort of white. And I think that's the problem that we see because you don't know anything else. But I think learned racism also comes out of sometimes people's experiences. But I think that's where that kind of translates, whether it comes into their kids' lives, whether they're teaching their kids something, whether overtly or not. And I think also too, you know, the fact that we as a whole don't have the experience, especially in this community, with a ton of diversity. I think it's not necessarily that it's learned racism here, but there's a lack of racial understanding because there is not a clear-cut diversity in this town.
People have you know, accepted black people. Yeah, it's not as big as a problem, but it is a problem still today.
I think you guys live in a great community in the fact that you have teachers that are willing to have these conversations and parents who are willing to educate you about these issues. And I think if you didn't have that foundation, we wouldn't be having the conversations that we'd be having in class. You wouldn't be reading necessarily the type of material you're reading in class and addressing the issues such as racism or sexism or heterosexism or whatever. But you guys, I think, also are living in a bubble, in essence, because so many people in your community look just like the next person, and there isn't as much diversity in the community as a whole. So I feel like sometimes the lens of your experience is so narrow because you don't have a lot of voices present in the classroom of different backgrounds, whether it be socioeconomic, religious, you know, racial, ethnicities, etc.
I think what Weston does well is, you know, acknowledging it and then working towards kind of making it not an issue.
In the tradition of all great literature, Huck Finn is invaluable for transporting readers to a time, place, and conflict essential to understanding who we are today.
Without this work, an author of a review of Huckleberry Finn argues, there would be a hole in American history and a blank page in the history of African Americans.
No,
Why not?
because African Americans have made such incredible history.
I think it was important, but I don't think it was essential.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to disagree with that. The perspective that he shares is one that's very hurtful, and I don't feel like it's an accurate portrayal of who we were, so I don't feel as though it leaves some void that we wouldn't have read it if we didn't read it.
I agree with the idea that if we don't read it, there's a blank page in history. The blank page in the history of African Americans, I'm going to have to entirely disagree. You know, Jim is not indicative of the entire slave experience of the 19th century. One person should never be representative of an entire race's experience. I think that's A, problematic, and B, it's dangerous because we are only getting such a narrow perspective. And I think it's dangerous because it creates that single story.
Given the number of blank pages there are in the history of African Americans, who cares? I mean, like, if they burned all of, I mean, it's like, honestly, there's plenty of literature from that time, and there's so much that's been forgotten about African Americans. But that's my reaction to this. It's like, let's talk about racism like way back in the day. And I'm like, are you kidding? You know, like we just talked about the fact that racism exists like literally 2 seats away. Why don't we stop having a controversy about Huck Finn and start just dealing with 2 seats away? Because the racism and the people that were damaged by it in the time of Huck Finn, they have passed on. You can't make their lives any better. They're already dead.
being open to conversation is the first thing, especially at the high school level. You guys are mature enough to talk about these big picture issues and brainstorm about them and think about what are we going to do with this when we get older. I mean, you guys are the future senators, presidents, doctors, lawyers, teachers of this country. So it's in your hands to decide what you want to do. So I think you guys have the power of youth as a whole. So like using that just as your platform and not being afraid to stand up for what you believe in is going to be so important for your generation.
Being mindful of it, being conscious of it. I'm not sure we're ever going to eliminate any kind of ism. Something we always strive to do and get better and better at it. As long as there are unequal playing fields, you're going to have racism, sexism, all the isms. Okay? But being mindful, being conscious of it, and consciously working to undo where you can, where you see it and it's tangible, and to dismantle it. And being conscious of what we teach our kids, from generation to generation.
Well, I suppose you can unlearn it.
How would you do that?
Introspection.
I think that's kind of an easy fix if you educate more people, because the color of your skin shouldn't matter.